Hello there and good morning. It is 10 a.m. You're watching Sky News Today, your headlines. The UK officially in recession. The economy shrinks by more than expected, but the Chancellor says he's sticking with his plan for growth.
The underlying picture here is an economy that is more resilient than most people predicted.
A huge rise in anti-Semitism in the UK, described as an explosion of hatred, with reports of incidents reaching a record high. A malicious fabrication. The Kremlin hits back after America warns about Russia's nuclear capability in space.
We're in Kansas City, Missouri, and there was gunshots.
One person killed and at least 8 children among the 22 injured. It's a shooting at the victory parade for the Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. On the front line of the child mental health crisis, Sky News visits the community centre, stepping in to help young people struggling to find support. And
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff. Go SpaceX, go IM-1.
liftoff for a lunar lander, a successful start to the mission to the moon's South Pole.
Vehicle switching gun range.
Hello and good morning. Thank you for being with us. Now, the UK has officially gone into recession after the economy shrank more than expected last year. Growth was down in all sectors, but this morning the Chancellor has insisted he will stick to his plan, maintaining there are positive signs of progress. Now, a recession is technically when the economy shrinks for 2 consecutive financial periods, and forecasters expect that, unlike downturns of the past, this one is going to be comparatively short-lived. Now, that isn't much comfort, though, for the millions whose finances are feeling the pressure of rising costs. Let's take a closer look at the data. Between July and September of last year, gross domestic product shrank by 0.1%. And in the following financial quarter, that is October to December, it contracted again, this time by 0.3%, more than predicted. Now, despite those figures, the country's GDP actually rose by 0.1% across the whole of 2023. Earlier, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, said he is sticking to his plan.
We always expected growth to be weaker while we prioritised tackling inflation. That means higher interest rates. And that's the right thing to do, because you can't have long-term healthy growth with high inflation, but also for families. When there's a cost of living crisis, when the cost of their weekly shop is going up, their energy bills are much higher, it's the right thing to do. The underlying picture here is an economy that is more resilient than most people predicted. Inflation is coming down. Real wages have been going up now for 6 months. And if we stick to our guns, independent forecasters say that by the early summer we could start to see interest rates falling, and that will be a very important relief for families with mortgages. We always expected that growth would be weaker while we were tackling high inflation. That means that interest rates are going to be higher. That's the right thing to do, because high inflation is a massive pressure on family budgets. It means the cost of the weekly shop is much higher than it would otherwise have been. But it also makes it impossible for businesses to grow sustainably. So the primary objective is to bring down inflation. And actually, if you look at the underlying data in the economy, we are succeeding in doing that much faster than many people predicted. It's fallen from 11% to 4%. Many people thought it wouldn't hit the Bank of England's 2% target for a year. It now looks like it might do that in the next few months. And when that happens, you can start to bring down interest rates and start to get the much healthier growth that we all want.
Living standards, they still haven't returned to their pre-pandemic levels. This is the stuff that people really care about. Wages still aren't back to where they were in real terms before the financial crisis. Are you proud of how the Conservatives, not just your government, have handled the economy?
Well, if you look at what's happened since 2010, the economy has grown faster than France, Germany, Italy, Japan, many other similar countries. We've actually
not
created...
The US,
no, the US has grown faster, and I do believe that in the long run, lower taxed economies tend to grow faster, which is why I started to bring down taxes in the autumn statement. Since then, we've also created 800 jobs for every single day that we've been in office. We've given the UK a technology industry, the industry of the future, that is double the size of Germany's, 3 times the size of France. But notwithstanding that, we've also had a pandemic. We've had a Ukraine war that has meant that inflation rose to more than 11%. So the primary challenge since I became Chancellor, the most important thing that I can do to relieve pressure on families is to bring down that inflation rate. It's come down from 11% to 4%.
Yeah.
That's also very important for businesses that are trying to grow and expand. And that is why we need to stick to our guns, and independent forecasters say if we do that, inflation will come down to its target in a matter of months. And then we can start to see interest rates falling.
Great. And so let's talk about tax cuts, because you say you believe that tax cuts are the way to grow the economy. Can we expect some more tax cuts in the budget in the coming weeks, and where will they be?
Well, you will know that chancellors don't talk about budgets just a few weeks before, and that's for a very good reason, because I don't yet know the final numbers that I will receive from the Office for Budget Responsibility. But what I would say is that I do believe, if you look around the world, that the economies, as we were talking about, like the United States and Canada, which have lighter taxes, particularly lighter taxes on business, tend to grow faster. But I would only
L, C or N
that was responsible, and I certainly wouldn't do anything that fueled inflation just when we're starting to have some...
you worked.
Okay, so let's talk about responsible tax cuts. There's obviously taxation, there's also spending. Your spending plans that are currently in place have been described by some as a work of fiction. Unprotected budgets in the 5 years to 2028 are set for a 16% real terms cut. Are you prepared to constrain public spending even further to fund tax cuts?
Well, you'll have to wait for the budget for the decision that the Prime Minister I eventually make. But what I would say is that I was Health Secretary for nearly 6 years. I negotiated a lot of extra money for the NHS. I'm a passionate supporter of the NHS and all our public services. But in the long run, the best thing that I can do as Chancellor for the NHS is to make sure that our economy is growing healthily. So what you will see in everything I do in the budget on March the 6th is prioritising economic growth. And we have a plan that we are sticking to, which is bringing down inflation and unlocking the potential for growth. May I say, in stark contrast to the Labour Party that has just abandoned the central plank of their economic plan. They don't have a plan. This is a time when we need to stick to our guns.
The IMF is saying that you should not be cutting taxes. Are they wrong?
Well, lots of independent commentators have different views. What they should do, and everyone else needs to do, is to wait until the budget, and then what you will see is the United Kingdom prioritising economic growth so that we can relieve pressure on families up and down the country who've been going through a very difficult period.
So tax cuts in the budget would be responsible?
As you know, chancellors don't talk about the contents of budgets. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that has been a convention for many, many decades. But what I will say is that we would only ever cut taxes in a way that is responsible.
Well, I'm pleased to say we can now bring in our political correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan, who was putting the questions to Jeremy Hunt there. And Gurpreet, good morning to you. Look, you valiantly tried to get out of the Chancellor whether or not tax cuts were coming in the budget. He told you many times not going to talk about that. But we've heard this morning the UK is technically in recession. But what does that actually mean for families up and down the country?
Yeah, Jeremy Hunt there was trying to put a bit of a positive spin on this, saying that the priority is actually getting inflation down and that low or no growth or negative growth is actually just part and parcel of that. But I think there's no getting away from the fact that the government will be disappointed by these figures, minus 0.3%. That was worse than expected. Expectations were for a minus 0.1%. That comes off the back of negative 0.1% in the third quarter of last year too, meaning we've met that technical definition of a recession, 2 successive quarters of negative growth. I think the question is, does that really lead to a radical reinterpretation of the past 6 months? And I think there the answer is probably no. The economy has been pretty stagnant now for the past 2 years since the Bank of England has been ratcheting up interest rates to cope with high inflation, and we've all felt this. Our living standards have declined, mortgage costs have risen, rents have gone up, people are dipping into their savings, and I think what is so illustrative of that is one of the figures in the GDP release today. GDP per capita, that's when you take all the GDP and you divide it by the number of people in the country. It gives us a sign of how our living standards are doing. That was minus 0.7%, and it's been declining consistently since the middle of 2022, the longest unbroken streak of negative GDP per capita since records began in the 1950s. And this is deeply embarrassing for the government. Remember Rishi Sunak, when he came into power, his big sell was that he was turning things around after the mess left behind by his predecessor, that him and Jeremy Hunt were going to steady the ship. And as part of his 5 pledges, he said that he would have the economy growing. So uncomfortable questions he had to answer there, and you can imagine that Labour, Rachel Reeves is about to speak to us shortly, will take this opportunity to stick the knife in. I think if there's some good news that can come out of all of this, it's that the recession, it's likely to be a shallow one. We're probably already out of it. As Jeremy Hunt said there, inflation is broadly coming down. The Bank of England is expected to start cutting rates, interest rates, by the middle of the year. That will leave more money in people's pockets, more money for people to spend in the economy, and that could boost growth. That at least is the message that the Treasury is trying to put across this morning.
They certainly are. Okay, Gurpreet, for now, do appreciate that. Thank you very much. And viewers, here's one for you to make a note of. At 11 a.m. this morning, we're going to hear the response from the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, coming after that news. As we've heard that the UK has technically entered recession. We'll bring you the Shadow Chancellor's response from a news conference at 11 a.m. And a little bit later on at 1:30 this afternoon, we're going to be bringing together a panel of experts to answer any questions you may have about what a recession really means. We want to hear from you, so scan that QR code. Get your phone out, scan it now, and you can get in touch and join us for that Q&A. As I say, it's at 1:30. We're going to have a panel of experts answering your questions of what the country being in a technical recession actually means for you and your family. Scan the QR code, submit your question, and join us at 1:30. Now, the reported cases of anti-Semitism in the UK have hit a record high. The Community Security Trust, which is a charity that provides protection for British Jews against attacks, has described the situation as an explosion of hatred and an absolute disgrace. More than 4,000 anti-Jewish incidents were reported last year. That's the highest annual total that the charity has ever recorded. Most of them, 66%, occurred on or after the 7th of October attacks by Hamas on Israel. Last year marks a 147% rise on the number recorded in 2022. Now, Dr. Dave Rich is Director of Policy at the CST, and he says that the increase is shocking.
Now, we knew on the morning of 7th of October, when news broke of the Hamas terror attack on Israel, that we would see a big surge in anti-Jewish hatred in this country, because we see it every time Israel is at war. And that in itself is bad enough, that it can be so predictable and it always happens, and we should never accept that as normal. But the scale of it this time has been really shocking. The numbers have been much worse, much higher than we've ever seen previously.
Now, Russia has dismissed the warning by the United States about their nuclear capability in space, calling what's been said a malicious fabrication and a trick. Let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, for more on this. Good morning to you, Dom. So what is this all about? The Russians planning to put nuclear weapons in space?
It's a good question, Kamali, and it's pretty murky because it involves spies and intelligence committees on Capitol Hill, and they're not always entirely clear about the detail. But what effectively the US administration is saying is that it's gathered highly sensitive data which shows that Russia is developing some new kind of space weapon, what sounds like a satellite killing weapon. Exactly what that weapon is going to be, whether it's nuclear or not, isn't at all clear. But it's worrying enough for the chair of one of the intelligence committees on Capitol Hill to sort of go public with it. So the administration came up with the data, it shared shared the intelligence with all those sort of key figures on Capitol Hill across the American government. And as I say, this committee chairman has said he's so worried about it that he's gone public with it and raised the alarm. And he says he wants the administration to release and declassify all the data about it, so those who need to know about it know the full details. What it seems to be about is what the Ukraine war is doing to space, where the war of the conflict is effectively further militarized and weaponized space. So the Ukrainians have made very effective use of the Elon Musk Starlink satellite system, and that has differed from what the Russians have prepared for in previous sort of hypothetical wars, where they would have been prepared for American satellites bristling with military technology, but being a limited number of them. Now, the Starlink system obviously has thousands of satellites, and that is a much bigger threat for the Russians, and it's being used by the Ukrainians to spy on the enemy, to send data back to them, and for their ground forces to use on the ground, and use AI to target Russian targets. You can probably hear the alarm there, Kamali. I'll probably have to cut this short and do what you do when fire alarms go off. But effectively, this is something the Americans are very worried about. They are urging the administration, the intelligence chiefs are urging the administration to do more about it. And they're saying that the Russians don't have this capability yet, but they're developing it, and they're doing so effectively enough for people to be worried about it. It's a kind of escalation in the space wars that we've seen for a while now. But according to what we're hearing, it's a bit of a step change in that escalation.
Okay, Dom, thank you for that, and apologies for that fire alarm. I thought it was a missile launch. All right, let's move on. And at least one person has been killed and 22 others injured, including 8 children, after a shooting at the victory parade for the Kansas City Chiefs, who've just won the Super Bowl. Their team were celebrating with their thousands of fans when shots rang out. 3 people have been arrested, and the police there are yet to determine a motive. Here's our US correspondent, Martha Kellner.
See them pumping up the crowd there on the top of the bus. There's confetti.
It was supposed to be a day of celebration. More than 1 million people cramming the streets of Kansas City to welcome home their Super Bowl winning team. One of its stars, Travis Kelce, boyfriend of Taylor Swift, throwing a ball to fans. But then the party is pierced by gunshots. A mass of red shirts run in the direction of the city's Union Station. With so many people in such a small space, it's difficult to tell where the bullets are being fired from.
We're in Kansas City, Missouri. There was gunshots.
One woman hiding under a car phones the police.
Who's the other guy that helped me?
Another parade goer tackles one of the presumed shooters. A Kansas City radio station says one of its DJs, Lisa Lopez, died in the shooting. The city's mayor was forced to run to safety too.
I was there with my wife. I was there with my mother. We never would have thought that we, along with Chiefs players, along with fans, hundreds of thousands of people, would be forced to run for our safety today.
There were 800 police patrolling the parade, but they couldn't prevent the bloodshed. 3 people have now been arrested, and investigators say the motive for the shooting isn't clear. It's not thought, though, to be terror-related. In a statement, Travis Kelce said, "I'm heartbroken over the tragedy that took place today. My heart is with all who came out to celebrate with us and have been affected. KC, you mean the world to me." This level of gun violence is all too common. This, the 48th mass shooting just this year. At an event to mark the country's biggest sporting victory, it is a uniquely American tragedy. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Okay, you're watching Sky News Today, and still to come. We'll look at the Community Mental Health Service providing much needed support to young people. I'll be speaking to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, as he reveals changes to the London Overground map. And
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff. Go SpaceX, go IM-1.
SpaceX and NASA head to the moon's south pole. Will bring you the latest on the search for water on the lunar surface.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
There is now a mandatory evacuation for this street. For many people, Harvey is far from over.
Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque.
We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over, and this is a country in crisis. It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground.
How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing.
Welcome back. Now, Sky News has been told underinvestment in children's mental health services resulting in immediate suffering for thousands. Now, to try and find solutions, communities have been funding their own counsellors to help desperate teenagers who can't get an appointment. And now the NHS is referring people there in an effort to deal with the backlog. Our People and Politics correspondent, Nick Martin, has been to one such centre and a warning, Nick's report has references to suicide and self-harm from the start.
I always thought about being a basketball player.
Yay!
I enjoy it a lot.
Sebastian is 11 years old and nothing makes him happier than being out on a court, because bullying in school led him into a dark place.
People were really badly kicking me. They were making me bleed, and it hurt a lot. And it was happening for a long time. I got a sudden idea that I wanted to cut myself because I didn't want to exist. I thought that maybe without me the school will be better and everyone will forget about me.
Sebastian's story takes us to the heart of a mental health crisis affecting hundreds of thousands of children.
It was painful and heartbreak. Yeah, my heart was broken because I hate see him sad. I feel very bad because the most important thing ever in my life is to see my child happy.
Sebastian's GP didn't refer him to the NHS's Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service, CAMS for short. He was referred here, a community centre.
We have parents coming in here who don't know where to go. They're crying out for help. If you think about young people being referred into CAMS, the waiting list may be 2-3 years. At that point, mental health issues have become massively entrenched. They've become such a big problem. Children need to see somebody and see someone now.
How do you think other ways you can make friends outside school then?
I'm not sure. I don't really like to go outside.
What does it say about the system that referrals are now coming to you, a charity effectively?
It says that it's broken. The system is broken. You've got a glut of young people who just don't know where to go.
Just under 500,000 children and young people in England are currently on mental health waiting lists, 85% higher than before the pandemic. Seeing their local children wait so long for help, this centre decided it would offer its own professional counselling service.
it's very normal that we have food banks because people can't afford to eat. There's a cost of living crisis. Go to a food bank. It's becoming the same for mental health.
So there's a food bank down the road dishing out beans and pasta. This is like a mental health bank dishing out support and counselling.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Been wonderful. Very proud of you.
But the Jade Centre receives no funding from the NHS, despite the NHS sending patients here.
The kind of my job is to create the conditions for better health.
That's unsustainable, according to experts in public health.
We definitely underinvest in children's mental health services for children with mental illnesses, however mild or severe those mental illnesses are. There's zero doubt on that.
So that underinvestment is leading to suffering, really, for thousands and thousands of children.
Immediate suffering and life course impacts. But what we need is kind of stability and certainty over a long period, and then we invest in our children's future.
Long-term cash commitment.
Yes, undoubtedly.
The NHS says they're treating record numbers of young people for their mental health, and the Department for Health and Social Care told us they're investing an additional £2.3 billion a year into mental health services.
Is that borne out by what you see on the ground?
Not at all. Where is it? I don't see it. I've never seen it, ever. You know, we've had lots of people come and say that they're going to do things for this community and they're going to invest this much money. I've never seen it ever. It's never changed ever. There's no investment. There is no money. I'll believe it when I see it.
One of the things when we first started talking is that you didn't feel people were listening to you. But now you're starting to feel like they are.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a massive difference for you. Yeah.
Nikki supported Sebastian and his family through a difficult time, and now, thankfully, he's doing well.
Sebastian looks much more happy now, more calm.
Dobrze zrobiłaś, mamo. Brawo ty.
This is about as far from a clinical setting as you can get, yet the NHS and others are now relying on places like these to help desperate children and their declining mental health before it's too late. Nick Martin, Sky News, Rotherham.
Now, if you or someone you know have been affected by the issues that were raised in Nick's report, you can contact Samaritans on their helpline. That is 116 123 116 123, or you can email joe@samaritans.org. Now, let's take a look at the weather forecast.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's going to be very mild going Plenty more to come on Sky News Today this morning, including the UK falling into recession. We'll have the analysis of the Institute of Directors. Welcome back. Let me bring you some breaking news that's just come in to us across the wires here. And the IDF say that special forces from the Israeli Defense Force are inside Nasser Hospital, that is in Khan Yunis. They said recently they have credible intelligence that Hamas held hostages in the hospital. Let's bring in our correspondent, Diana Magnay, joining us live now from Jerusalem. Diana, good to have you with us. So, look, what do we know about this operation that seems to be ongoing at Nasser Hospital?
Yes, the IDF has just given a briefing saying that special forces went in early this morning. They call it a limited and precise operation, which they say these troops have been training for some time because they believe that Hamas has been hiding behind civilians in the Nasser hospital, which has been, which all around of which has seen very, very intense fighting over the last couple of weeks, and people haven't been able to evacuate, and patients haven't been able to evacuate, and supplies haven't been able to come in. And they say they also believe that hostages were kept there by Hamas inside the hospital, and that part of their objective in this operation is to recover the bodies of some of the hostages who they say were kept there. But they also insist that the hospital must stay operational. They're not asking doctors and patients to leave, but that the displaced who have been sheltering there, we saw the sort of first evacuations yesterday from that hospital, and the IDF says they've opened up a humanitarian corridor to allow people out, civilians, to get out of harm's way as this operation goes on. You know, they do always insist that these are limited and precise operations, but there are always casualties. Otherwise, the death count wouldn't be as high as it is in Gaza. And we have heard from a doctor inside the hospital that so far one patient has been killed and 7 more wounded, and we'll presumably hear more as this operation goes on.
Certainly will. All right, Diana, for now in Jerusalem, thank you for that. More from you, I'm sure, throughout the days. We continue to follow that situation at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. The IDF say they are carrying out an operation within that health facility. All right, let's return to our top story. In the UK, officially having gone into recession after the economy shrank more than expected last year. Now, between July and September, gross domestic product shrank by 0.1%. In the following financial quarter, October to December, contracted again, this time by 0.3%, more than was predicted. Now, despite those figures, the country's GDP actually rose by 0.1% across the whole of 2023. Well, to pull all this together, let's speak to Dr. Roger Barker, Director of Policy at the Institute of Directors. Dr. Barker, good to have you with us. I mean, technically in a recession, what does that mean for people and families up and down the country?
Well, it's not a good outcome. I mean, this is still a pretty mild recession, but from a psychological point of view, I think we were hoping to put this label on it that we're in recession. And I think it does emphasize that we're still not yet out of the woods in terms of the economy. Our members are showing a few green shoots in terms of slightly better confidence over the last few weeks. But really, most forecasters are not expecting any growth this year. So this year is really expected to be pretty much like last year, namely the economy going nowhere, just not growing at all. So the government and the Bank of England still face this major challenge. How do we get the economy growing? And, you know, that's what ultimately will make us all feel better, especially as we're in this general election year.
Yeah, so go on then, Dr. Barker, you tell us, how do we get the economy growing?
Well, I think the Bank of England can take the first step. I think it's important that they start to cut interest rates sooner rather than later. The inflation figures that came out this year show that inflation is still at 4%, but most forecasters are expecting that to really decline back to around 2%, the Bank of England's target. So I don't think there's any, from our members' perspective, there really isn't really any need to delay for too long. And that's really emphasised, I suppose, by these very weak growth figures that we've received today.
So the Bank of England cutting rates. What did you make of the speculation? I mean, Jeremy Hunt didn't want to be drawn in it when we spoke to him earlier, about the potential of tax cuts. What could that do to the state of the economy, do you think?
Well, you know, the government, as we all know, has very limited fiscal headroom. But I hope that when Jeremy Hunt does move to the budget on the 6th of March, that he does consider business and not just look to a tax cut for the general population to win electoral support. Jeremy Hunt did a certain amount for business in the autumn statement. He introduced this new tax break of full expensing. I hope that he doesn't think that he's now done all he needs to do for business, because business is still in a fragile state. And he could do something like, for example, match the cut in employees' national insurance, which came into force just recently, with an equivalent cut for employers' national insurance. Now, that would directly benefit the financial position of many companies and would help to sort of nurture now these green shoots of economic confidence.
Yes, because I was going to ask you about that because, of course, as you mentioned, there was that full expensing that was in the previous autumn statement. How are businesses dealing with wage growth and how is that affecting you and your members?
Well, yes, I mean, this is the big concern that the Bank of England has and why it's kind of reluctant to want to cut interest rates at the moment. Wages are still growing quite healthily, just under 6%. So the Bank of England is really waiting to see that come down. But I think wage growth is very much a lagging indicator of the overall inflationary environment. And as we see the headline rate come down, we're going to see wage growth come down as well. So I don't think that the bank should look to that as a reason for delaying cuts in interest rates.
And that idea of sort of lag as well, there are some commentators who say that these kind of metrics are backward looking anyway, and perhaps we shouldn't really be giving them too much weight at this point. Do you agree?
I think that's right. And the problem with looking at these backward measures, we saw that with the Bank of England when they were going into this current cycle. They were very late in terms of putting up interest rates to try and stem inflationary pressures. So the fear is that they're going to be late again with cutting. We'll start to see, I think, interest rates being cut in other countries fairly soon. I think the US, the Federal Reserve, is likely to begin cutting rates in the coming months. And we saw some slight inklings within the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England that rate cuts could start to be considered. One of the MPC members did vote in favour of a rate cut last time, but it probably is going to take a bit more time, knowing the Bank of England, to build the momentum for an actual rate cut.
Dr. Barker, in your first answer, you mentioned, we are in this election period now. It's not been called yet, of course, but it's coming down the track, of course. Have you heard anything? We're going to hear from the Shadow Chancellor in about 30 minutes' time. Have you had anything coming from the main opposition that tells you that they would handle the economy going forward in a different way?
Well, I think, what is interesting, actually, there is not a huge amount to distinguish the main parties in terms of business and economic policy at the moment. The big headline policy and initiative of the Labour Party was to invest £28 billion per year in green investment and green technology. But they seem now very much to have rowed back from that. And to some extent, that's understandable because the fiscal position, the budgetary position of the UK is pretty parlous, and they probably won't have the scope to do that. But if you then take away that, it's hard to actually see what the dividing lines are, at least in economic policy terms, between Labour and the Conservative Party.
And that's interesting, isn't it, Dr. Barker? Because, of course, we have had Rachel Reeves spending the past many years trying to restore any kind of fiscal credibility for the Labour Party. And essentially what you're saying is that she's done so well that you can't get a cigarette paper between them and the Conservatives.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think, there are some issues where perhaps there could be a dividing line. That's on things like potential changes to employment law. The Labour Party might want to give employees more rights. They might want to do away with things like 0 hours contracts. They might want to give full employment rights to employees on day one. But there is still a lack of detail around these policies, and we really would want to see more before we can decide if Labour will be good or bad for business.
Okay, Dr. Roger Barker from the Institute of Directors, really appreciate the time this morning. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, as we got that news of the UK entering a technical recession, as I said, we are going to hear from the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. She's going to be giving a news conference at around 11 a.m. and we'll bring it to you live when it begins. And at around 1:30, we'll be getting together a panel of experts to answer any questions you have about what a recession means for you and your family. We want to hear from you and give us your questions. You can do so by scanning that QR code that you see on screen. And you can get in touch and join us for that programme, as I say, at 1:30 here on Sky News. Now, parts of the London train network are getting a revamp. Lines on the London Overground will be renamed with new colours to enable passengers to navigate the system more easily. The services on these 6 routes are going to be known as the Liberty Line, the Lioness, the Mildmay, the Suffragette, the Weaver and the Windrush. And I'm very pleased to say we can speak now to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, all about this. Mayor Khan, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. £6.3 million it's said to have cost to do this. Explain why spending millions on new names and new colours for the lines is a good use of public money during the cost of living crisis.
Well, the money for rebranding these 6 lines is within the TfL budget already set aside. We speak to customers every day who find it a nightmare getting across these 113 stations, across these 6 separate lines, because they're all called London Overground, all have the orange colour, and you'll recognise from this great city of ours, we've got 12 tube line stations with distinct names, distinct colours. We've got the Elizabeth line, but these 6 particular lines are quite confusing. How do you get from Liverpool Street to White Hart Lane? How do you get from Croydon to Enfield? It's the same colour line, 113 stations, and it's a nightmare. So what we've done is we've engaged with customers, with local communities, with industry experts, with historians, and announced today 6 brilliant new names for these 6 distinct lines. It'll make it much easier for commuters to get across our great city.
Yeah, and you've got research that actually says that by giving them new colours and new names, people are going to use them more?
Yeah, absolutely. But also we're helping those who are visually impaired to get themselves around our city. Wayfinding is a big challenge. We've got 12 tube lines. We've got the Elizabeth line. We've got Dockland Lights Railway. We've also got buses and also now the Overground. The challenge is how you get around our fantastic stations and public transport network. We also know we're a city that has the largest number of tourists in the world. How do tourists get around our great city? So it's been a long process. We've been engaging with customers, communities, people across our city. We've announced the 6 names today. Not everyone's going to be happy, but we think we've managed to please most people, which is really important.
You can't please all the people all the time, Mayor, as you well know. Now, one of the lines is called the Windrush line. I do wonder, I guess people who have been caught up in the Windrush scandal would be less happy with the naming of a line, but perhaps with all the recommendations of Wendy Williams' report being implemented. Would you encourage any future Labour government to make sure all 30 of her recommendations were implemented on Windrush?
Look, the hostile environment that the Windrush generation and their children and grandchildren have endured is a disgrace. We've been calling on the government for some time to implement the recommendations from the Williams report. I myself have given financial support to those advising the Windrush generation to get compensation. I've written to the Prime Minister asking him to expedite the process. Look, I was really pleased the Prime Minister sped things up when it came to the post office scandal. Why can't he do that with the Windrush scandal? He, in the course of a couple of days, passed legislation to sort out that disaster. Why can't he sort out this disaster? And my worry is more and more people are passing away due to old age. Their children aren't eligible for compensation. They should be eligible for compensation to be passed on to their children and grandchildren. But I was speaking just now to Arthur Torrington, who is responsible for supporting the Windrush community. He's so proud that finally there's a recognition of the contribution made by successive generations from Empire Windrush. And this line starts in Hargreaves Islington, goes through Hackney, goes through Peckham, goes down to Croydon. Those communities transformed due to the contribution made by the Windrush generation.
Absolutely did, and good to hear you're continuing to push on those recommendations. Now, while I've got you, Mayor Khan, I do want to ask you about your party and the situation they have found themselves in for the past week or so with this anti-Semitism row. There are so many issues that we could go through, but let's just start with this. You've heard what Gavin Jones was reported to have said at that meeting, talking about expletive Israel. Was what he said anti-Semitic in your estimation?
I think it was. Look, I've seen a number of things in the media, so I've got to rely upon what I've seen in the media. I wasn't at the meeting. I've not seen the transcript. Look, when you bear in mind the sensitivities of how people across the country are feeling, those from a Jewish background, those from a Muslim background, language matters. And when I speak to Jewish Londoners, the way they receive some of these things, they feel scared, they feel frightened, and sometimes this language can be used as a code. And I think we've got to be cognizant of that, particularly if you aspire to be a member of Parliament or you've been a member of Parliament. So I'm only going upon what I've read in the media, so I've not seen the transcripts, but as far as I'm concerned, that sort of language isn't acceptable, and it certainly shouldn't be acceptable in a party like mine that is proud to be both anti-racist but also anti-Semitic.
And we'll come back to some of those...
beg your pardon, tackling anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. We'll come back to some of those efforts to try and deal with anti-Semitism and racism in a moment. But I do want to stick with the anti-Semitic incidents. You will have seen the CST reporting today 4,103 instances of anti-Jewish hate across the country, 2,410 in the City of London and Greater London. How are you going to make Jewish Londoners feel safe, Mehkan?
Well, firstly, I recognise the heightened fear Jewish people feel, particularly since October the 7th. I've met Mark Gardner and many of his fantastic colleagues from the CST on a number of occasions before October the 7th, as long as I've been mayor, but particularly since October the 7th. It's really important that those of us who aren't Jewish show allyship to our Jewish friends and neighbours. There's additional police patrols across London, particularly in those parts of London where there tends to be a synagogue, schools where Jewish children go to, or Jewish businesses. It can't be right that people's place of worship, people's school, people's businesses are targeted for no other reason because they are Jewish. So in addition to patrols from the police in those parts of London, we've been speaking to members of parliament, councils and others in those parts of London to support those communities. I want to encourage anybody who's the victim of either anti-Semitism or Islamophobia to report those to either, whether it's CST or Tell Mama or the police. That means the police can take action, but we've got to wake up to the scandal of anti-Semitism across not just our city and our country, but across the globe.
Mehkan, back now to the Labour Party and its issues with anti-Semitism and anti-racism. You'll know that there have been a couple of members who've been suspended. Obviously, Azhar Ali is no longer the candidate for Rochdale, but some other members of the party have been suspended for similar things. Diane Abbott has been suspended for 300 days for writing an article that was deemed to be anti-Semitic. Do you recognise that there is a difference in the way that the process is happening within the party? Martin Ford said that there seems to be a hierarchy of discrimination.
Look, since Keir Starmer became leader of my party, the Labour Party has been transformed when it comes to addressing the issues of anti-Semitism. Previously, there were too many members, activists, who were saying things that were clearly anti-Semitic and action wasn't being taken. I also welcome the fact that Keir Starmer accepted fully the report from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission and its recommendations. It's really important, though, to recognise that one of the things that's happened is politicians have been taken out of the equation when it comes to disciplinary processes. That's really important because we can allow our individual prejudices and friendships to cloud the judgment when it comes to investigations of people who are accused of saying things that could be, either racist or anti-Semitic. I don't want to get involved in individual cases. What's important, though, is there are proper processes that are followed.
Now, Mehkan, you were one of the first senior Labour politicians to call for a full ceasefire in Gaza, the 27th of October. You'll know that there is a vote coming in Parliament next week. The SNP are going to table a motion calling again for a ceasefire. Will you encourage your colleagues within the parliamentary party to back that ceasefire motion?
Well, I think it's unwise to comment on a motion that you've not seen. I'm quite clear, though. The loss of life, both in Israel on October the 7th, but also subsequently in Gaza, is unacceptable. We're talking about more than 26,000 people losing their lives, men, women and children in Gaza. We're now hearing the Israeli government talking about attacking Rafah. These Palestinians were encouraged to go from the north down the middle, down to the south. The fear they have is not just the loss of life, but being displaced again to another country in Egypt. I would implore those who are close to Netanyahu telling him to stop this madness, stop this killing. We're talking about men, women and children losing their lives on a daily basis. I am fed up waking up every day and seeing the trauma and heartbreak of another person losing their life in Gaza. Of course, Hamas must release the hostages. Of course they must. But there's no excuse for this death, destruction and desolation. So anything that can end this killing needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Well, look, Mehkan, there's going to be a motion. I mean, I know you're saying you haven't seen it, but I can tell you the SNP are going to call for a full ceasefire. I mean, I've got the wording of the tweet from their leader in Westminster, Stephen Flynn. The UK Parliament can't sit in its hands. There must be an immediate ceasefire. Now, if the opposition were to back that, perhaps it put more pressure on the government to have a stronger voice, calling for those people you say, Netanyahu and them, to bring about a full ceasefire. So will you be encouraging those who can to back that motion?
Look, everyone knows my views in relation to the ceasefire. You're really not going to get me to comment on a tweet about a motion that hasn't been written for next week.
Okay, but you want to see a full ceasefire, and I'm guessing you would want the British government to do all it can to try and bring that ceasefire about.
Well, look, Prime Minister Sunak, claims to be a really close friend of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Where's the evidence that Sunak has any influence over the Israeli government? What the Israeli military is doing in Gaza is unacceptable. What Sunak should be doing is using his influence over Netanyahu to stop this killing.
Okay. Mehdi Khan, always good to get your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Thank you. All right, let me bring you some breaking news coming from Avon and Somerset Police. They are saying that a 16-year-old boy has died after being stabbed in the St Philip's area of Bristol on Wednesday evening. 16 years old and died as a result of a stabbing on Wednesday. We're going to get more detail of that news coming out of Bristol as we get it throughout the day here on Sky News. Now, after a technical glitch halted the first attempt, a private US moonlander successfully launched today. It left from NASA's Cape Canaveral in Florida.
3, 2, 1, ignition, and liftoff. Go SpaceX, go IM-1 and the Odysseus lunar lander.
Well, the craft is attached to a SpaceX rocket and it's aiming to land on the South Pole. Scientists believe there could be billions of gallons of water. Now, if all goes to plan, it'll be the first American lunar touchdown since the last Apollo mission half a century ago. Let's bring in our science correspondent, Thomas Moore. For more on this, Thomas, good to have you with us and good morning to you. So they rescheduled it, but all seems to be going well for now. What's the next stage that we need to look out for?
Yeah, textbook launch all the way up to the point of releasing the spacecraft when the rocket was travelling at 23,000 miles an hour, several hundred miles above the Earth, and it's on its way to the moon now. It has powered up successfully. We haven't yet had confirmation that everything is okay, but certainly when Intuitive Machines, the private company, last communicated, everything looked to be going really well. So it's got more than 250,000 miles to cross to the moon. It's called Odysseus. If you remember your Greek mythology, Odysseus he undertook an epic journey, and the spacecraft is on an epic journey of its own to the South Pole region of the moon, where they do believe there is water, but it's going to have to undergo a perilous landing in a heavily cratered with lots of boulders, and the lighting's not great, and it'll do it all on its own on the 22nd of February. It'll be an exciting landing.
It certainly will, as long as it can touch down successfully, as you say, Thomas. Right, Thomas Moore for now. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's take a look at the weather forecast for Earth.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, you can expect it to be mostly mild going into this weekend, but it will be unsettled and, get this, in some places there will be localised flooding from the rain. Now, temperatures are going to remain well above average this afternoon, 17 degrees Celsius, that is 63 Fahrenheit, incredible. That's possible in eastern England. Far further north, it's going to be much, much colder. Now, the country is going to see patchy rain in the north and west. Elsewhere, it will be mainly dry with sunny spells. Okay, you're watching Sky News Today and plenty more to come. We're going to have more on that news that we brought you earlier from Gaza, that the IDF are carrying out an operation within the Nasser Hospital, one of the last functioning health facilities within Gaza in the city of Khan Yunis. And of course, the news that the UK has officially entered recession after 2 financial periods of negative growth. We're going to have all the analysis of that and more coming up at the top of the next hour. Do stay with us here on Sky News Today.
The Sun Super Days is back, so I'm treating the kids to a brilliant day out at Sea Life Aquarium.
Save up to £66 on 2 tickets, now with tens of thousands of weekend and holiday dates. Super days for them, super savings for you. Continues today, only in The Sun.
I wanted to find a job where I could use my creativity. What I found in Explio was that I went from walking the flight line in the Air Force to leading teams of designers developing the next generation of aircraft.
Hey, Charlie, you're on your way to Ghana. Boy, oh boy, you stressed out, tired. Go, you're going to be resting. Okay, then let me recommend to you JN Mobile Spa in Accra, Ghana. Oh boy, JN Mobile Spa will provide organic care in massage. Are you stressed? Do you need rejuvenated, etc.? For your facials, maybe exfoliating, firming, and lifting? Then contact JN Spa on 00233 244 941 002 or 00233 2006 06 386, and they will be right there on time. JN Mobile Spa, your health and beauty needs at your doorstep.